Talk Back. Thank you for joining me in this episode. My name's Patrick, and I'm Frack. Frickety Frack, We Do Talk Back is a show where I discuss different aspects of fandom and how they relate to the gospel. We're going to be going through an episode of Bleach, Thousand Year Blood War, and connected to teachings from the Bible. The name of the show comes from my dad, who dubbed my brother and me Frick and Frack since we were kids. So we're going to be covering the 31st episode of Thousand Year Blood War, titled Against the Judgment. So we get in this episode we get to see how powerful Aizen has become, and where he's clearing out the swarm monsters. He's performing high powered Hado number 90, and he's doing all of this while still having his spiritual pressure contained. Now it's not overflowing like it it's supposed to be the one of the things they talk about. Mayuri talks about that this is just to keep his from being able to expand further out than it's supposed to. But so my understanding too is that they even talk about that Aizen is most likely now stronger in this moment than when he fought Final Zangetsu Ichigo. So it's going to be kind of interesting to see. I mean, if you have read the manga, you kind of know where this is going to get, where it's going to go, but it's just going to be kind of interesting to see how they add to it, because they've added some things in the Thousand Year Blood War uh, anime that's not in the manga, and so it's one of those things where it's just going to be very interesting to see what they do with this, and um, and so we see the fallout from Yuabaha. Um, Absorbing the Soul King, and one of those is uh, that like I mentioned earlier, the Swarm monster comes into play, and the Soul Reapers are having to fight against the Swarm monsters while trying to safely get to uh, the R&D location, and that's where Aizen kind of comes into play, and he uh, clears out a lot of it so that way they can be relatively uh, safe. So then the other thing that happens in this episode is that uh, there's a coming together of Soul Reapers and Stern Ritter that are going to work together to take down Yuabaha. Baz B killed Na 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 because uh, Basby, Giselle, and Lopato uh, want to fight against Yuabaha because he abandoned them. And so they're like, no, none of this. We're, we want to fight and get revenge. And Swordbear's are like, okay, well, we can use you. And so they do that. So they've come to an uneasy truce. And so those are just the kind of interesting things. But one last thing that I want to talk about, it's going to lead into the biblical theme, but I want to talk about this first, is that Shunsui proves to be continuing to prove to be a very different captain from Yamamoto. Uh, he cares about fighting with honor, but he also really cares about making sure that they have something to fight for and to come back to. Because if they don't, if they only follow rules of honor, then this could lead to their destruction. And he's not for that. He wants to, he's going to use someone like Aizen to get the job done. So that's going to what leads into our biblical theme of Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. This is what it says. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. Now, for this verse, there's some context that you might need if you're not familiar with Genesis 50, verse 20. This is when Joseph, who is the son of Jacob, meets his brothers after having been sold into slavery into Egypt. So Jacob showed favoritism to Joseph, and the other brothers did not like this, and so they they wanted to kill him, but they decide not to do that. So they're like, oh, we'll just sell him to slavery. So they sold him into slavery. He ends up in Egypt, and through God working in Joseph, he ends up becoming the second most powerful man in Egypt behind Pharaoh. And because of all that, because he was able to interpret the dreams that God had placed in Pharaoh, Joseph was able to prepare for a coming famine. And so Joseph was able to do that because none of the other wise men or, dream interpreters or anything like that couldn't understand Pharaoh's dream. But Joseph could because God gave him uh, the knowledge of what those dreams meant. And so he was able to lead the entire nation and then save his family from that famine. And so Joseph was able to do this because his brothers had done this terrible thing to him. And so Shunsui releasing Aizen for his power to help in the fight against Yuabaha is very similar. Like all the other Soul Reapers that are present are really upset about Aizen's presence eh, and being out of the Mugen. And because Eisen manipulated, he killed, he sacrificed people for his own gain, and I'm sure they're all thinking the same thing as like, well, how long will it take for him to turn on us and leave us to the wind? And so, but Shunsui makes the argument. He was like, listen, it's like we can fight with honor, but we're going to lose, and then there's going to be nothing, or I can take this hit. I can do this really, not nice thing, bring Aizen, and we might have a chance of beating Yuabaha and saving the Soul Society, the land of the living, and Hueco Mundo. And so, so for me, when I was thinking about this verse and what it means for us as Christians, that unfortunately bad things are going to happen to us. I wish I could say that they're never going to, and that everything would be hunky dory. That's just not the case. And so, for now, what I want to encourage you is that you know bad things will happen, and so we have to always remember to rely on God and to trust in Him. That where it might seem like not, terrible, awful things are being done to you, but we can show our faith. Joseph never lost faith in God, even though he was sold into slavery, falsely imprisoned, uh, never knew if he was going to see his family again. Yet he always remained faithful. So I want to encourage you that in this time, it's a crazy season that we're living in. I want to encourage you that let's keep the faith. Let us remember that even though things might not be going our way, God can use these moments to guide you to be even in closer relationship with Him. And you can learn from these experiences to know God better. So I want to encourage you today. And if at any time you need a prayer, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, and I'll get more into that later. All right, so how am I going to rate this episode? Well, it's a solid episode. It's a good episode. It's one that you probably need to watch. Um, but it's also one of those where it's like, it's not that big a deal. But we do get to see, how Khan saved the day. He saved Ichigo from Uryu's attack, or Hime's healing everyone, and so we get to see that group of people together. Uh, but ultimately, the plot does move forward, but it felt very slow and moving. And so I'm going to give this episode a solid 4. There's movement, but slow movement, and it, it it's nothing special. It's just good. It's just a good episode, but it's nothing to write home about. Like if in rewatches, if you were to skip this episode, I think that'd be fine. Other than the great Eisen lines, he always has some great lines, so you might want to watch him for that. All right, so anyone with questions for me about the biblical lesson that I talked about in this episode or any other discussion ranging from anime, comics, or just anything in general, feel free to email me at frickityfractalkback@gmail.com or reach out to me on Twitter at frickityf or at frickityfrac on Instagram, Facebook, and Threads. So please rate, review, and subscribe. Remember that I love you, most importantly, God loves you, and go release your Bankai.